Welcome to WEL Partners on Predatory Marriages, a limited podcast series. My name is Jacqueline, and I'm joined by Daphne Franks, a longtime advocate of better protections against predatory marriage. Now, last podcast, we started talking about patterns that Daphne has observed over the many cases of predatory marriage that people have talked to her about. Because Daphne has a lot to say on the topic, I was very rude and I had to cut her off last time. So we're going to keep going on that topic, especially because I know Daphne also wanted to speak on predator patterns that she's seen, not just with the predators, but also with other people's reactions to what's going on. So Daphne, would you be open to speaking about that now?
Yes, of course. Yes, people tend to react in the same patterns to the predator's behavior. So they tend to believe the predator. One thing I would say is the predator is always more convincing than the family. The predator is calm, charming, measured, reasonable. The family are not thinking clearly. And one thing he always used to say was, Daphne's so hysterical. And I thought, I've been known for being hysterical. What's going on? But it is a seed they try to sow, predator tries to sow. And people in authority tend to react in similar ways because you are not expecting such an extreme thing to be going on in your ordinary life. Um, so they just think, well, this can't be true. And they tend to think, oh, there's two sides to every story. And perhaps there are, and I would also argue that just because a couple meet and just suddenly, and just because there's a big age gap and just because they move in, suddenly doesn't mean it's predatory. It might not. And the other point is, just because the family might not be terribly pleasant, but that doesn't mean that the marriage was legal. In fact, I did an interview for one of the national newspapers, and they said, what if you had a couple who'd been living together for 30 years, and then one of them lost capacity, and then they got married? Would that be okay? Because that would be okay, wouldn't it? Because they've been living together for 30 years. And I said, no, it wouldn't. Absolutely not. Because if they'd have wanted to get married, they could have got married in any time in those 30 years. You can't just wait till somebody loses capacity and then marry them. And the perpetrators would probably paint that as a very sweet thing to do. But it's not. You've got to look through all the smoke and mirrors. One of the registrars who was involved in my mother's wedding said, but if he looked after her and then he married her, isn't that rather nice? And I just thought, I don't know where to start with this because there was so many red flags going on that didn't, that they just didn't take notice of. Um, so yeah, but at the same time, marriage with a big age gap, it can be no problem. There's somebody in my family with a 25-year-old age gap. They've been happily married for a long time. So you can't assume that it's predatory. But the facts that I gave in all that patterns, those all of which are indicators, they're all red flags that something needs to be looked into more.
Mm-hmm. On that note, I know, so in your situation with your mom, Joan, she was surrounded by a lot of loving family. And
She
so
was.
a very obvious response to someone saying, well, but he looked after her and wasn't that lovely is, well, no, like the consequence, the flip side of that was the social isolation and the lies and the wedge between her and her family in the last years of her life and all those flow on.
Yep.
But one question someone asked me, and I wonder your thoughts on it, is what about situations where someone doesn't necessarily have the loved ones around them? They really are alone and vulnerable. And then something that falls within the category of a predatory marriage happens. Someone might be inclined to say, oh, that's nice. They have someone. They're living their best life. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's not nice. I really don't think it is. But I mean, it's part of the bigger picture of romance scams. I've been involved. The Home Office in this country was doing some work on romance scams, and I was involved in that for a while. And one of the things is some of the people who are being scammed actually know it. Um, but they're prepared to put up with it for the company and for the person being nice to them. And I think that's absolutely tragic. In my mum's case, she didn't know what was going on, and therefore I think it's a very dishonest relationship. And I think back to when mum was of sound mind, what would she have wanted? Oh, there is no way she would have wanted that. There's no way she would have looked twice at a controlling man like that. Absolutely no way. So actually, no, I don't think it's nice. I think it's cruel.
No, your mom's predator, we've heard a fair bit about, and something you told me that really shocked me is, when we're talking about patterns repeating across predators, there's also predators who themselves create a pattern and potentially are entering into multiple predatory marriages sequentially. Would you mind speaking a little bit more to where you may have seen that happen?
Sorry, I missed that because I coughed. I'm sorry. Could you say
Oh,
it
no,
again? I'm really
it's
sorry. I'll
okay.
just mute myself for a
You've told me about times where, predators are potentially repeating the actions that they've done, even though they've been
Oh,
brought to
yeah.
authorities. Would you mind speaking a little bit more to what that looks like, what you think should happen, things like that?
The problem is the cases that have been won have been cases where the predator has been really extreme, has had a big history of crime, that kind of thing. The core predator has a history of low-level crime. I spoke to a relative and he was saying this. He's always had a history of low-level crime, just the odd dodgy thing, that sort of thing. Um, and so therefore, I think that um, you shouldn't. There needs to be a way of looking out for these low-level warning signs to stop them repeating the pattern. And in fact, our predator appears to be currently repeating the pattern with the wife that he married after my mum died. It seems to be happening all over again. I didn't know what was going on, but I suddenly had a call from the very distressed family who had tracked me down. So we need procedures in place to stop these people before they start, and not the procedures that people kept suggesting to me, which was, why don't you get some men with baseball bats to see him off? No, that isn't. We need legal procedures.
Qualifies as a procedure.
Yes.
Oh, golly, yeah, and even if it did qualify as a procedure, I don't think it's one we pitch on a law pod.
No, absolutely not. And we have always tried to do things absolutely legal. And I know not everybody would, but quite honestly, a lot of the cases, all the cases I've spoken to have just been trying the legal means and getting nowhere.
So that's another bit of a pattern then in terms of external, is it's not just people saying, "Oh, that's lovely," but it's also dismissal from the legal profession. Would that be?
Yeah, yeah, yes. I think the legal profession tend to look at things in a slightly different way just because of how they've trained. And case of people have often said to my face, "This is a really interesting case," and I'm kind of, "Yes, it is. You try living through it." But yeah, it's uh, and I have kept a sense of humor about it because I can see why people can say, "Oh, yeah, this is really difficult to sort out." Actually, I don't think it's as difficult to sort out as people think. If you combine all the different services together, if you had some joined up thinking between the doctors and the social workers, if you had everybody coming together. I know that it's been done with domestic abuse, of the violent kind of the kind that people know. I mean, I would say this is domestic abuse, but of the kind where often a man hitting a woman kind of thing. They have got that. I've done work on that maybe 10 years ago where they've all the different authorities have linked up and all said, the man, we're on to you, we're looking at you. And that just doesn't seem to happen here with these predators.
Okay. On that note, are there any other patterns that you want to be able to speak to while we're on this topic?
No, I think that's about it. There probably are more that I've forgotten, but because there are so many things that come up all the time. But as soon as somebody starts talking to me, I kind of think I could tell you the how this story is going to go, and that's really sad, isn't it? I suppose one thing that concerns me is there is nobody, the person in the UK who seems to be putting this all together is me. And it shouldn't be. There needs to be somebody in charge of linking together all the law and the safeguarding at marriage, to make sure it's all joined up. But people seem to know about one aspect of it and not the other. So sometimes, um, when I speak to solicitors, it's like that thing I said, solicitors did not know how you would put on a caveat in expectation of marriage. They just didn't know how to do it. Nobody had told them, you need to go to the registrars, but there's no joined up between the solicitors and the registrars.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know because I think there are in Canada, it varies a lot from province to province. Again, anyone who's unfamiliar or new to the topic, I totally encourage to check out our very first blog in the Predatory Marriage series that does a bit of a recap of some of the resources Kim Whaley, the founder of our firm, has put out. Um, there are places in Canada where we use the caveat system too. So I think even speaking to you about the cases that go on in the UK has made me wonder what patterns and major holes and disconnects exist with our systems here, even more so than we've previously thought about and identified it well. So if I'm not going to be rudely cutting anybody off this time, I think this brings us to a natural close for this podcast. In the future, we are going to be circling back to a similar topic of assumptions that get made a lot. So like what Daphne said about, a lawyer assuming that, for example, a registrar wouldn't marry someone who doesn't know the name of the guy she's supposed to be marrying. Um, Things like that, assumptions that go across professions. So we'll be circling back a little bit. But for now, this brings us to the end of the podcast. Next time, Daphne and I will discuss the assumptions, including the assumptions professionals make about each other. So for now, I encourage you to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, stay safe and stay well.